Welcome back. This should be the last time you see me doing the intro next to the Duramax, as we've got everything about wrapped up and ready to fire it off. We also had a car come in and needed ball joints and bearings, so we got a little bit of footage to share with you of that. And the Z1R is getting a little bit more back together. Hope you enjoy it. New exhaust manifold is going on the driver's side. That match better. And new hardware as well. Since we're doing an EGR delete, this port is no longer necessary, so we're putting a cover plate on it. And finally, the turbo goes back into place. Here we're torquing the up pipes that go from the manifold to the turbo. Here the fuel filter housing is going back into position. Next, the fuel lines are hooked back up.
Click this real quick.
You sure?
Yes, I heard it.
Next, the thermostat housing is installed. We're getting close to completion as the accessories begin to go into place. Here's the air conditioning compressor, and then next the alternator will go on. Here, one of the two idlers is being positioned before the belt goes on. One of the fuel injector connectors needed to be replaced because the lock had broke. If you look on the one on the left-hand side, that's the replacement one, and the bottom tangs do not line up. GM's correction is to grind those off. Here's the connector with it ground, and it does fit into position. Now we just need to solder it in place. You can see this ball joint is in pretty bad shape. With the brake caliper and bracket out of the way, the students get busy pulling the lower strut bolts out in preparation of removing the steering knuckle. Here the students are using a ball joint press to remove the lower ball joint. Alright, there's your ball joint. Now the new one gets pressed into position. Here they're installing a new snap ring. The control arms are pulled down to get the steering knuckle back into position to put the ball joint in. A pull jack is used to put a little pressure on the lower control arm to get the bolt through. Then the axle nuts get torqued to 160 pound-feet. Using an impact driver to remove the screws securing the rotor. Just like with the front, the rear axle nuts need to be removed. With the 4 bolts securing the hub and the backside removed, the hub can be taken off. Then the new one can be installed. Here the bolts are being tightened from the back side. Next the rotor can go back on. With the axle nuts torqued, the new cotter pins can be installed. With the taillight bracket painted, Eric is putting the taillight back on. Then he puts it back onto the bike frame. A section of the tape of this wiring was coming apart, so we're removing it and replacing it with new. The tape we're going to be using is specially designed just for electrical wiring. Unlike electrical tape, which should never be used on a car, this stuff is designed just for that purpose. So it's a little more expensive. But a couple things to notice about this. First of all, it's wider than normal electrical tape would be. But also when you pull the protective coating off the back, you would think this would be sticky, but it's not. The idea is that when you pull the tape and you're stretching it as you're wrapping it, it will bond to itself kind of like Velcro does, and it stays on there extremely tight. It's a lot stronger and more durable than electrical tape. The other thing you'll notice about this too is that it has a blue line on the front side of it. The blue line is there to find center for you, so as you're wrapping it, the idea is to just go over top of the blue so that you know that you're getting a 50% coverage as you're wrapping it around the wire. And so when you're doing it and when you're done, you should not see any blue anywhere on the tape. Here you see Noemi is holding the wires taut as Eric wraps the wire. That's pretty key. It is difficult to do it by yourself, it's not impossible, but if you can get someone to hold the wires tight for you and keep them close together while the tape is going on, it'll make for a much cleaner job. Here he's just about at the end of it, so he's got just enough. He'll get that wrapped, cut off the excess, and then finish it up. And there it is, and it looks fantastic.
Finishing time.
Here he's putting the connectors back onto the connector bracket, and then it will get mounted to the battery box and put back into the frame. These are the last two pieces that need to be finished before putting the entire final drive back into the car. Alejandro assured me that these were ready to spray, so I'm doing them as a wet on wet. I've already shot the primer, now I'm going to shoot the green. We'll let that flash off, we'll do it a couple more times, and then we'll be ready to put the whole final drive into the frame.
We're installing the new transmission mount with new hardware.
Here the front universal joint gets bolted to the rear of the transmission. Definitely not as common a design as we see today. For the locking mechanism, we put the lock on with a plate, and then a cork gasket will go on next, and then another steel piece to sandwich the gasket. Another cork gasket goes into place for the piece that mounts to the rear of the transmission. I'll explain more about how this functions and lubricates in a later episode once it's all together.
Down to start with? Or
Yeah.
Yeah. Good there? You have some?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I got to see the complete driveline and the chassis this week. We had a small fatality while trying to put the pieces together. And what we've learned is that much like when you paint components and you have to chase the threads before you can put the bolts in because of the coating of the paint, that you can't paint every single thing. So we've learned that the front part of the torque tube, we're going to have to sand the paint back about 6 inches so that this tube can actually fit over it, because it is so snug a fit that just that little bit of paint was not allowing this to slip over the tube as it should. So we're going to have to make these repairs and paint this again, do some sanding on the torque tube, and then hopefully next week you'll see the entire drivetrain sitting down on the frame. Next time on Bulldog Builds, we'll have more of the Z1R frame put together. We have a vehicle coming in with a broken bolt from a tensioner in the engine that we need to get out. We'll get that driveline straightened out for the 48 Chevy and have the engine sitting down on the frame, and we'll take our Duramax for a test drive. See you next week.